Hi, good evening, and welcome to our virtual convention of Agudas Yisrael, to a session, Transforming Relationships. Relationships are something that are so important to every one of us at all levels. It's something we begin with every morning when we say Modani. We begin a relationship with the Ribbono Shel Olam. We then have a relationship with our friends, our spouses, our children, our parents, our classmates, our co-workers. Relationships are the entire day. And the Torah tells us how important relationships are. At the very beginning of the Torah, it says, Lo tov hiyos adam levadai. The Torah puts right up front the importance of relationships. Being alone is not a good thing. Being together is something that's very important. So it's something that we're all very, very interested in, something that we all want to learn more about, something that we deal with today, tomorrow, and throughout our lives. And Baruch Hashem, at today's session, we're going to have an expert, Dr. David Lieberman, who's written many books on the topic and has spoken many times at our convention on many topics, including this one, and has always given hadracha that has made the difference. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. David Lieberman, who will speak to us on the topic of transforming our relationships.
All right, thank you so much, Rabbi Becker. Welcome, everyone. All right, so we have a lot to cover in terms of transforming relationships. These are interesting times. You don't need me to tell you that. These are unprecedented times. And the ability to be able to maintain healthy relationships, particularly those with people closest to us, is undeniably valuable, particularly so during these COVID times. So we're going to cover a number of different areas, three main areas. Number one is we're going to talk about just ways to reframe our relationships, ways to look at our relationships differently, different attitudes, perspectives we can have in mind. Because if you're able to organically change how you look at somebody, then your response, your reaction is naturally going to be different. You don't have to force yourself to behave a certain way. So we'll look at, again, 4 different ways that we can reframe, redefine that relationship. Then we're going to get into tachlis, practically speaking. The 2 biggest friction points when it comes to relationships is as follows. Number 1, when you have to give techacha, when you have to give rebuke, when you have to tell somebody that they're doing something which may not be 100%. The challenge with this kind of person is that he or she is very, very sensitive. If they could hear the techacha in the first place and do tshuva or apologize, whatever it is, you wouldn't have the problem in the first place. We're going to assume that this is the kind of person that will either melt down or shut down, or they're going to react viscerally, they're going to attack, become aggressive, and so on, because they cannot hear any sort of criticism. Next, after that, we're going to look at what we do when somebody wants something of us. When we're not actually maybe makabel their techacha, they want to critique us, or even to do something that we don't necessarily feel is the right thing to do. So think about this. If you're able to, number 1, reframe all your relationships, look at people differently. Number 2, be able to give critique in a way that other people can hear and not shut down, but actually enhances the relationship and conversation. And third, be able to have somebody come to you with an issue. It could be personal, professional life, doesn't make a difference. Whatever the arena is, wherever they are, be able to come to you and still not do exactly what it is that they want, but find yourself in an enhanced relationship rather than an injured one. So, we laid out the groundwork, and let us begin. Number 1 is this. It's our responsibility to appreciate the large reality, and that's something you already know. Everyone in our lives is a shliach, a messenger from Hashem, custom-made, tailor-made for our good and for our growth. The reason why this Talmud compares anger to idolatry is because if I get mad at you for something you're doing, I'm taking Hashem out of the equation. So we'll begin by reminding ourselves of something we already know, and that is that everyone in our lives is here for our good and for our growth. And sometimes we talk to Hashem like we're talking to the mafia. Hashem, so-and-so, my life would be a lot better if, you didn't hear it from me. But maybe if they slipped, fell, moved away, whatever it is. what we fail to realize is that these people are in our lives for our good, for our growth, for us to learn. And we get the feeling sometimes, perhaps, that, when this type of person moves up and moves on, right, somewhere in Shemayim, another person is just being stamped out to take their place. And that's because it wasn't this person who's in our lives to inconvenience us. Rather, they are here for us to learn. So we need to begin to ask ourselves the right question, and that is, what is the message for me? Okay, with that Hagdama in mind, we will begin. Just because somebody did something wrong doesn't mean you have to get angry as a result. Now, the reason why this is so profoundly necessary is because the Yetzer Hara will convince us, the ego will tell us that, if somebody did injustice to me, somebody did something wrong, I need to go ahead and to tell them that they have indeed offended me or hurt me. Here's the challenge. First off, from a physiological standpoint, there's a saying in biology that cells, or neurons, brain cells that fire together, wire together. That means every time there's a stimulus and a response, the connection between those brain cells, called dendrites, grows stronger. So you're actually reinforcing your reflex to become angry when somebody does something that you don't like. Now, Chazal told us thousands of years ago, but research shows us today. And that is, in as little as 21 to 30 days, you can rewire your physiology and actually make it easier for you to remain calm. Simply, each and every time, by remaining calm. The Ramchal explains the external awakens the internal. By putting on a more calm exterior, we're actually going to remain more calm inside. Now, this does not mean that we repress our anger or suppress our anger, something Mirza Hashem will get to. We are talking about the benefits of being able to maintain control over ourselves. Because what happens is that the more angry you become, the more your mind thinks to justify why it is that you're becoming angry. So we actually increase blood pressure, we increase the justifications, the rationalizations, we come up with all the intellectual thoughts and ideas to reinforce, to buttress an emotional response. We convince ourselves that this person deserves our wrath. And it works in reverse too. By remaining calm each and every time, it makes it that much easier and easier and easier to maintain our calm. Someone came over to me in shul not too long ago, and he said that person next to him during Shacharis was standing on his talis, and he was pulling on it, and the guy wasn't budging. And he looked over, and he's giving him that kind of look, and this guy's just davening. He's not budging. He's pulling, and he's getting more annoyed, more angry, more frustrated. And then finally, he looks down, and he realizes he was standing on his own talis. And he said, I was still angry with the guy. But that's what anger does. It does, as Chazal explained, when a person becomes angry, they lose their das. And physiologically, once again, the adrenal glands produce a number of hormones, neurotransmitters. One of them is called cortisol, also responsible for weight gain, called the stress hormone. It interferes with the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for executive functioning. We actually become dumb when we become angry. So, once again, just because somebody did something that you don't like doesn't mean, nor does it benefit you from becoming angry. Every time you remain calm, it makes it easier and easier the next time and the next time. Okay. The question we want to ask ourselves now is, why is it that we become upset in the first place? In other words, why do we become so bothered when somebody does something that we don't like? And in broad strokes here, the answer is because we take it personally. We make it about us. The more a person's ego is engaged, and it just follows psychology here, and those of you that know my talks on Torah Anytime, we go through this a number of times. The more self-esteem I have, the more I genuinely love me, the smaller the ego. The less I love me, the bigger the ego. The ego is a false self. It's a projection of how I want the world to see me, right, in order to convince them. It's sort of a facade, it's a show, but I convince them of who I really want, how I really want them to see me. And that's what the ego does. So whenever the ego is engaged, it is very scared. Any threat becomes a visceral threat, an existential threat to its very existence. Because the more a person identifies with the ego, the more they begin to see themselves through the lens of the I. And the wider the gap between who we are, the genuine self, and the ego, right, the less authentic we are, the more energy it takes, and so on. So, when a person does something to you that you don't like, and your ego is engaged, you're focused on your own pain. But it's only the ego that makes it about you. You understand? Let me give you an example. Let's say you're at a chasana, and somebody comes over and they start screaming at you, calling you a ganav, calling you a thief, calling you an awful person. Meanwhile, a crowd is forming around you. Music stops. This guy is screaming. You wish the ground would open up. You're feeling just completely embarrassed. But then in the middle of his diatribe, he calls you by the wrong name. And then in that moment, you realize, as does everyone standing around you, it's a case of mistaken identity. He's got the wrong person. And now, instead of feeling bad for yourself, you begin to think of this poor guy who is making such a scene and thinking that you're somebody else. Rather than be embarrassed, you hold your head up high. You're thinking, wow, I'm going to be in the next, Yoel Gold or Rabbi Pesach Krohn video. This is amazing. The tzaddik or tzaddikus who didn't talk back or scream back when the person was yelling and screaming at them, right? It completely shifts your mindset only because you're focused on their pain instead of yours. Whenever you're in a conversation with somebody, the degree to which you take it personally is the degree to which you're focused on your own pain, your own stuff. If you're able to see through this person's lens, to see through their world, to see their pain, you're not in pain. And again, you're only going to focus on one person's pain, either yours or theirs. If you focus on yours, you're fighting an uphill battle to control your nature, control your anger. If you focus on their pain, you have empathy for them, you're seeing through their lens, you cannot become upset. Imagine you're walking down the street. Somebody bangs into you. You turn around a little bruised, upset, scared, and you see it's somebody who's visually impaired or otherwise handicapped and trying to simply get by. In a moment, your anger dissipates because you see that person's fragility, their vulnerability, their helplessness. You're able to see on the outside. And that's a challenge when you're dealing with difficult people sometimes, is that hard, gruff exterior hides a very soft inside, but you're not able to connect to it. You're not able to see it. But make no mistake, whether you know it or not, they all have a story. We all have a narrative identity. We all have a way of seeing our world, explaining ourselves to ourselves and to the world. And whether you are aware of it or not, when somebody is, there's a saying that people who are hurt cause hurt. When somebody is in pain and they're not healthy, it's going to leak out to the world around them. And once again, you know this is true in your own life. When you're in a great mood, when everything is going your way, when everything is just amazing by you, you're treating the whole world great. Everything is coming up beautiful for you and for everyone else. But when you're in a bad mood, a low state, constricted consciousness, you become more emotionally stingy. And you're not always able to see from the other person's perspective, because it's like, imagine having a toothache. Now imagine, we all have, I guess, the different points of a toothache. That throbbing physical pain, right? You become absorbed in your own stuff. It's very hard to see from someone else's pain, which, by the way, a hallmark of emotional health is the person who's able to rise above their own stuff, their own physical, emotional pain in the moment, and put their attention into someone else's and look at their pain. But the more ensconced we are, the more enmeshed we are in our own stuff, either in that moment or in life in general, the more difficult it becomes to see through someone else's lens. And difficult people in our lives in particular are stuck with an emotional toothache that throbs constantly, reinforcing their own pain. That is why they have a hard time seeing yours, because they're just locked in their own. Okay, so once again, just understanding this mind shift, we didn't get to the talk list of, practically speaking, in terms of how to navigate relationships with this kind of person or with difficult people, but it does help us to sort of reframe and to look at them differently. Alrighty. Lots to cover here, so we're going to... By the way, what's interesting is that we talked about how it's hard sometimes to focus on someone else's pain when we see a gruff exterior, we see a lot of arrogance and bravado, but really there's a soft, vulnerable inside. And similarly with us, when our ego engages, it's only because that person has come close to hitting that third rail, that emotional that raw nerve that cuts deepest. Because just in the whatever it's worth category, the reason we get offended, the reason we get more sensitive is not when somebody says something that's true that you're willing to accept, right? Not when somebody says something that's blatantly false that you know is just not true. But when somebody says something that is kind of true, but you don't really want to fully accept. which parenthetically, goes to the core of our own response and our own ability to maintain our emotional equilibrium in conversations, and recognize that, we may be getting sensitive only because this person is hitting that emotional raw nerve within us. If I call this podium a chair, right, it doesn't say anything about the podium. It says a lot about me. It says perhaps Lieberman has a problem. But, this podium is never going to get offended. This podium is never going to think, oh, wow, you know what? He called me a chair. My father was a Barker lounger. Maybe it knows what it is. I mean, we're assuming that it knows what it is. By the way, I was speaking to college kids, and I said, if I call this a chair, what does it say about me? And this kid was great. He said, it says you're very creative. I thought, that's nice. You know what? Can't be wrong today, by the way. It's just, everything is subjective. Anyway, so this podium is never going to be offended. It's only when somebody sort of hits that raw nerve within us that we think may be true, but we're not really able to accept it. Which is why, something that Chazal tell us, of course, that if you see someone else and identify that trait within them, maybe it's something worth paying attention to in yourself. But the larger picture there is that you can identify the trait, but if it's something that you own and accept, let's take, for example, just very quickly, and there's a lot to cover here, but you have somebody who has a drinking problem, and they fully own it, accept it, and they can see, obviously, who else has that problem very, very easy. Their antennas tuned into that. If they accept it, they own it, they will speak to that person with such empathy, such compassion, such sympathy, such rachmanis, such a sense of caring, because they know what it's like, and they only feel that person's pain. But if somebody has an issue that they are denying, they're not accepting, they're not owning up to, and we see somebody else with that, that's when we become very, very upset, because they're holding a mirror up to us that we don't want to see. It's a projection of our own stuff that we're not willing to accept. So, once again, the food for thought category. Alrighty, I wish we could take questions. Next, if someone in your life suffers with emotional illness, diagnosed or otherwise, it is not your job to fix them, not your job to cure them, not your job to educate them. Your job is to love and accept them. This does not mean that you allow for them to run roughshod into your boundaries and to traipse into them in unhealthy ways, something which maybe we'll get to. Lamaisa is, what it does mean is that a weight will be lifted off your shoulders when you recognize that your job is to love and accept them. Again, it doesn't mean that you allow them to come into your space in an unhealthy way. It does mean that you're no longer waiting for that perfectly crafted moment to introduce reality. You don't no longer sort of thinking that you're one sentence away from getting this person to see the light. There's an infrastructure that's simply void of reason. As my rabbi explains, we all have blind spots. They've got theirs, we've got ours. Now, we think they're crazy because their blind spots are different than ours are. Ours make perfect sense to us. We've explained them already. But we have a harder time with somebody else's. So to us, they're crazy. Now, of course, the more egocentric a person is, the less healthy they are, the bigger and more numerous those blind spots become. But make no mistake, we all have them. But when you're speaking to somebody who's simply not getting it and they haven't gotten it in 15, 20, 25 years, call it a day. Stop banging your head against the wall or the door. There's nobody home. I don't mean this pejoratively, but it does help us to look at that person differently and to look at the relationship differently. You know what it's like? You ever speak to somebody who doesn't speak your language, let's say English, and you think that if you just enunciate clearly enough, gesture wildly, and articulate clearly, they can't help but understand what you're saying. Can you? Because it makes perfect sense to you. But it doesn't to them, because they don't speak your language. A person who has got a blind spot, who's emotionally charged, is not able to see clearly. So once again, we have an obligation to give a chachad, to give rebuke, but that's only true, as the Rambam explains, if we know that this person is going to accept it. If they haven't gotten it now, there's what to be said for calling it a day. Okay, lots to go on, but we're gonna move along. Okay, finally, look. There are different personality types. In broad strokes, you've got high self-esteem and a small ego, the healthiest person, like me. Then you've got low self-esteem and a big ego, the egocentric, obnoxious person. We know people like that. Then you've got what we call low self-esteem and the dented ego. That is the perpetual people pleaser, the doormat mentality. That's the person that doesn't give because they want to do what's right. Rather, they allow themselves to be robbed to assuage feelings of guilt or inadequacy. They're not able to stand up for themselves. They're not able to say no. If you're that kind of person, recognize this, that chesed means that you could say yes, you could say no. You choose to say yes. If you don't think like you can say no, it's not chesed. You're allowing yourselves to be robbed with consent. It's the difference between giving a donation and being robbed. In one case, $100, $1,000 is going out of your pocket. You're giving the money, tzedakah, charity. It's empowering. The other case, being robbed, is unempowering. Makes you feel weak and vulnerable. Same situation where you've got $100, $1,000 less, but it's the intention behind it. When you choose to give, recognize you're doing it from a position of power, from a position of strength. When you allow someone to take from you, no matter how much you convince yourself that it's right, if it's not right, if it's wrong to do, it doesn't empower you. If you're no good to you, you're no good to anyone else. It's sort of like making kiddush. Right? Make kiddush. If you pour out all the wine or grape juice to everyone else, there's nothing left for you to drink. Nobody's yotzei. Nobody benefits. There's no good comes from that. To the contrary, it has to be overflowing, the kais, and then you drink. Or age of COVID, pour some off into your own cup and then drink, and then pour around. And then everyone benefits. Okay. Now, on to tachlis. So once again, those are just sort of ways to just sort of reframe, to look at the relationship, to look at yourself, to look at the dynamics through a little different lens. And look, make no mistake, we all have difficult people in our lives. I was speaking once, beautiful community, Johannesburg, South Africa, and it must have been around 4,000 people. And I asked the question, because why not take questions when you're speaking to a huge crowd? It makes a lot of sense. And I said, is there anyone here who does not have a single difficult person in their life? No one raised their hand out of 4,000, whatever it is, number of people, except for one lady. We went back and forth a little bit, and then after, a couple of moments, I decided to call it a day. Afterwards, she comes over to me afterwards, says, Dr. Lieberman, blah, blah, this and that. I said, great, glad you, I just have to ask you one question. How is it that you managed not to have a single difficult person in your life? She said, it's very easy. I cut them all out of my life. I said, oh, very nice. Now, certainly you can do that. But we find something quite intuitive, and that is that the quality of our own emotional health and the quality of relationships go hand in hand. So it behooves us, it benefits us to be able to optimize our relationships, which leads now into the two biggest friction points in our relationships and what we can do to navigate them. So, number one, when somebody is doing something that you need to correct their behavior on. Now, of course, if they're going to hear it, if they're going to apologize, if they're going to correct it and the relationship is enhanced, by all means, go ahead and do that. We're speaking about somebody who is just super sensitive and either melt down, shut down, or just attack viscerally and aggressively because they cannot hear any type of rebuke. Here is the best way to be able to navigate that relationship with this person. Number one is this. Don't criticize. Not before you think that we're not left with any tools here. Don't criticize. We can get to how you have to criticize if you need to, but first, avoid criticizing, and let me explain what happens when you criticize this person. 3 very bad things happen when you tell them they're doing something wrong, and these 3 things do nothing to enhance relationship. Number 1 is they're angry with you, right? You've just made them feel, from their perspective, bad. You've made them feel less good about them. Number 2 is they're angry with themselves. They recognize, assuming that they have done something that was wrong, that they've done something wrong, and it fuels their feelings of guilt and shame. When a person feels guilty, they feel ashamed, they're less likely to go ahead and change. It makes it that much more difficult for them to be able to change in their own lives as well. We don't move forward when somebody beats us up. To the contrary, when somebody says, you're doing a great job, I really appreciate this, would it be possible if you could X, Y, Z? Sure. We are charged, we are re-energized, we are motivated from positivity. We are so fast to go negative, whether it's our children, our spouse, our parents, coworker, friend, doesn't make a difference. We are so fast to go negative. When somebody's doing something, again, first, what laying out the problem is, they become angry with you when you point that out because they feel less efficient, less whole, less good about them. They become angry with you. And finally, and most devastating, is they're now justifying to themselves all the reasons as to why it makes sense why they're doing. They're digging their heels in deeper, right? We lie to ourselves so we can live with ourselves. And the rationalization, the justification, the minimization, the blame, we go through all of these machinations, these ego defenses in order to explain our behavior to ourselves and to others. And when somebody criticizes us, it is too easy for us to resort to these mechanisms if we're not able to hear the critique. So again, when you criticize someone for doing something that they shouldn't be doing, that they feel bad about, three things happen, none of them productive. Number one, they're angry with you. Number two, they're angry with themselves. It just exacerbates the guilt and shame. And number three is he begins to justify all the reasons why it makes sense. So then, what are your options? When the person gets it right, whatever it is, that is when you acknowledge that they've done something that you appreciate, respect, are proud of, etc., etc., etc. We have to appreciate, and we'll walk through just a couple of examples here. Let's say, little Chaim has his hand caught in the cookie jar. So you can go ahead and give him a whole schmooze on you ask little Chaim, did you take cookies? He's wiping the crumbs from his mouth. And he says, no. So yes, no, whatever. You sit him down, 20-minute schmooze on how bad it is to lie, and how bad it is to take things that don't belong to you. How bad. The entire time, Chaim, again, angry with you, feeling smaller and smaller himself, and justifying all the reasons it makes sense to take cookies without your permission, and coming up with all his plans to go ahead and do that. The next time he has an opportunity, boom, he's going to take advantage of it. Rather, the next time Chaim walks by the cookie jar and doesn't take a cookie, it could even be Yom Kippur, it doesn't make a difference. That is when you charge that moment with positivity and you say, Chaim, I am so proud of you. And that 15, 20-minute schmooze and the importance of an emes and being honest and not taking things that don't belong to us. And he's charged feeling great the entire time. He's loving you more, loving himself more. And you're giving him, most importantly, an expectation to live up to. And make no mistake, people will live up to your expectations. If you set them very, very low, they're going to pretty much hit that mark. Set them higher, you've given them something else to live up to. One of the worst things you can say to a child, spouse, doesn't matter what it is, I knew you would get that wrong. I expect you to do it wrong. I mean, it's just sheer craziness. First off, whenever anyone does something that they've already done, don't make the mistake of, you missed the opportunity for a mitzvah. You could have had a great, okay, you passed that. Why? The same thing that takes place here. No spouse, no child, no friend, no Rebbe, no Talmud, no one is motivated by being told just how bad, awful, and lousy, rotten they are. Be positive. And when they get it right, don't do one of these like, hey, wow, look who finally came to the Shabbos table on time. But obviously that does nothing. But genuine enthusiasm, and particularly when you're dealing with somebody you're having an issue with in that dynamic, number one rule of whether it's shalom bayis or chinuch or whatever it is, ignore what you can ignore. When you're focusing on the positive, when you're focusing on the good, you will begin to see more good. Just parenthetically, and the time is ebbing, and I want to make sure that we cover as much ground as we can here. But there's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. RAS for short. It's located here, interestingly enough, in the regional Luz bone. The job of the RAS is to filter in, to hone in on what we deem significant. So, for example, you may have had the experience of renting or leasing a new minivan, or getting a new pair of glasses, or a hat, tie, whatever it is. You begin to see that on the road, to begin to focus on that on people. It's not, of course, because Hashem put more of them into your Dalet Amos, but rather because that's something that you're paying attention to, that's something on your mind, that's something you deem significant, and you're going to begin to see that whereas in the past you would not have. So then, one of the best ways to be able to transform your relationship with somebody who is maybe you're having a difficult time with, and again, we're talking right now about when you have to criticize them, and pulling back the lens and just to focus on the positive, focus on the good. There are always things you can look for in somebody that they're doing that's wrong. It's easy. We know the kind of person who can walk into a room, everything looks beautiful except for one thing, and he zeroes in on it. Now, okay, it's a personality type, it could be, his own stuff, whatever it is, we all do that to some degree. But in our relationships, wouldn't it be amazing if we were the kind of person who would look at, it could be the 1% that's great, and the 99% that's not. Whatever it is, we're just focusing on the good. And what happens is, from a physiological standpoint, the brain will go through hoops in order to accommodate your perception. We'll be able to see that much, much more. I want to share with you a beautiful story. I'm going to say it quickly because, again, time is ebbing away. Rabbi David Tranks Zatzal, who is brilliant. I had the chus to be his friend, to be his neighbor. I learned more from him, I say friend, he's his mentor, than just about anybody. And I was speaking with him and his Rebbitzin about a couple weeks before he had passed in their home, and she told me the following story. It's absolutely beautiful. She said, I don't know if this is in his book or not, but she said that, and she's a very sharp person. She is amazing with people. She gets people. But she told me for the following. For the first 15, 20 years of the marriage, she always thought that her husband brought home the most amazing kids, because every time a child, they used to have boys stay by their house all the time, he said, he said, I would tell her, this is the most amazing, we had such a schus to have this boy. Now this boy could have had problems, the length of anyone's arm. But he never saw it, never thought about it, never spoke about it. And what's so powerful here is this very intuitive, very bright, very aware, right, woman just saw what he did, because that's how he gave it over to her. So she only looked for the positive. Now, if he would have gone ahead and said, oh, we got a problem kid here, he's going to be a real pain, do your best, and let's say, he wants a cup of milk before they're going to have a fleishik meal or something. If that's in her mind, she's going to be thinking, oh, very nice, he wants to get this in now. But hearing it the other way around, oh, a cup of milk, look at that, that's tzaddik special. He wants to make sure he has the milk before the fleishik. We continue to just see things differently from how we look at them. And 15, 20 years, just because he was focused on the positive, genuinely saw it, she was able to genuinely see it. And it was the most amazing thing when she said she realized that, a lot of these kids, they had their challenges. With our own children, look, I don't know anyone that wants to be judged by their worst day, or certainly judged today as an adult on how they were when they were 15, 20, 25, 13, whatever it is. I don't know too many people that want to be judged on who they are today based on how they were yesterday even. So why not look at your children, look at your spouse, look at your friend through new eyes, positive eyes. Look for the good. Focus in on the good. And something magical will happen. You're going to be able to see the good. And then when it comes to criticism, it's a whole lot easier. Okay, so we mentioned before that the best way to avoid giving, to critique is to avoid giving it, but just very briefly we'll run down now what you can do if you have to give it. First is don't bring it up right away. You have to wait till you're both in a positive state. Sometimes people think that the angrier they are, the louder they have to scream in order to be heard. When someone screams at you, we simply just shut down. Chazal say this, the research backs this up, not that Chazal need the askama from research, but how a conversation begins is how it ends. The more gentle, the more soft-spoken you are, the more kind you begin, the easier it is to have a conversation. Now here's the thing, when you're talking about something that someone's done to you, right, it's very easy once again for that person to get upset. So ideally you don't want to criticize. If you find yourself where you have to go ahead and bring out the behavior, just keep it about you. See, here's the thing, no matter how sensitive somebody is, they cannot get offended if you don't accuse them of doing anything wrong, right? That much makes sense, it's logical. So if I never tell you you're doing anything wrong, you're going to listen with open ears, open eyes, and a closed mouth. You're actually going to hear what I have to say. The way we accomplish that with other people is we make it about ourselves. In a calm, quiet space, again, begin with, I really appreciate that you're doing this and that. I just want to let you know I'm having a hard time when XYZ happens. I haven't said that you're not thoughtful or that you're disrespectful or you don't love me, you don't care about me, blah, blah. I haven't said any of that. I'm only saying that you're amazing, you're great. In the scheme of things, I know it doesn't matter, but I'm making it about me. I'm having a hard time. Now your spouse, your child, your friend, whoever it is, rather than feeling beaten up, having to defend themselves, they now get to come to the rescue. And they get to give. And to anthropomorphize, Hashem is the ultimate giver. When we give too in our relationships, we feel great. So then, you just ask this person if they could just help you out. Could you please just be mindful? Again, I know it's not the end of the world. It's not a big deal. I'm just because of my own stuff, my own childhood, my own perception, my own feelings of insecurity, whatever it is. I'm having a hard time with it. I know you don't mean it. I know I'm taking it personally. Person would be thrilled, driven to be able to take you out of pain. Once again, as long as you're not putting him in pain by putting him on the defensive. So, you make it about you, take it on you, and then whatever positive improvement this person has, that's when we go to the first phase, and that is you acknowledge it, and you show appreciation and respect for it, and you're going to find that those negative behaviors simply fade away. Okay, now, moving along. When somebody comes to you, the second friction point in relationships, again, the first one is when you've got to go ahead and give tzedakah, give rebuke. When somebody gives it to you, and it's just either senseless, or it's ill-conceived, or it comes vitriolic and bombastic and very angry, and they're just sort of spewing a lot of, it could be directed at you, it could be directed at somebody else. You may be thinking, oh, yeah, what's going on here? Here's what you don't do. Don't tell the person, ever, calm down. This person is feeling out of control. The last thing you want to do is try to usurp that one little left of control that they feel that they have by telling them how to feel. Don't say, calm down, you're headed for a battle. Never say, don't worry. Right? When someone tells you, don't worry, have any of you ever suddenly magically, oh, I feel so much better. Lieberman said, don't worry. No. Don't worry, bitachon, these are things you work on and you tell yourself. They're not necessarily for somebody else. Now, you can get to the point of focusing on emunah and bitachon. But here's the thing. People don't care what you know till they know that you care. Whenever somebody is talking to you about something that's on their mind, again, either a critique aimed at you or just stam in general, the only way you're able to move into solution mode and be able to help them is if you're first able to let them know that you feel their pain. Once they understand that you get their pain, that you are connected to them, that's when you're able to move them to solution mode. But nobody wants you to short circuit how they feel, to jump in with an eitzah solution and to tell them what they should do until they feel that you get where they're coming from. Which is why when somebody's talking about something that's on their mind, right? Don't give them the latest, Pinterest quote on the beauty of suffering. Don't minimize, say it's not a big deal. Don't turn it around yourself. You just think, you have a conversation with somebody, you're telling them something that's bothering you, and in 2 seconds, they're talking about their own stuff and how it's really that much bigger and a lot more to worry about, and it's nothing compared to what they're suffering with. Very nice. You're coming to them in pain, and 2 seconds later, they're talking about theirs. Don't do that. You want to be able to show them genuinely so that you get their pain. And here's how you do it. Number one is, first off, if you don't feel it, do your best to be congruent. That means their pain is etched on your face, right? Non-verbally. You want to make sure your non-verbals are open. Your hands aren't crossed. Your arms aren't like that crossed. You're not looking away. You're not checking your phone. You're not listening with half an ear, half an eye. You are fully focused on them. And whatever emotion they're exuding, whatever it is they're giving over, that is what is etched on your face. Their pain is your pain. Once they see that you understand their pain, this is when you move into validation. Validation is so misunderstood, and it comes up again and again and again in relationship issues. Validation has nothing to do with right and wrong. Some people say, I can't validate my son, my friend, my Talmud, my neighbor, because they're wrong. They happen to be not just wrong, but meshugana, they're crazy. I can't. If I give them an askama what they're saying makes sense, it's going to come back to bite me. So I have to tell them, I got to put them in their place. It doesn't work ever, and you know this is true. When you do that, the relationship goes south quickly, and certainly that conversation is not productive. Validation has nothing to do with right and wrong. Validation simply means, based on your perspective, I understand why you're in pain. That's it. And if you think about it, authentically so, if you walk in this person's shoes, if you lived their life, if you saw the world and experienced what they did, when they did, how they did, you might just be wearing those same set of glasses that they do. You might just be seeing the world the same way that they do. You might just draw the same conclusion that they do. You know what? We've moved away from allowing people to have a different perspective to right and wrong. It's not just that this person disagrees with me or sees things differently. Rather, you're wrong and I'm right. And even more injurious is that you're not just wrong, but you're bad. You're a bad person because you hold this belief, this attitude, these feelings. We put a moral stamp and say that you're disagreeing with me, not seeing the world as I do, doesn't just mean you have a different perspective, which should be healthy. Doesn't just mean that you're wrong and I'm right, less so, but okay. But it means that you're a bad person. You look at this person contemptuously with the moral high ground, and now you think you're going to have a productive relationship? Empathy means being congruent with that person's emotions. Validation is that stamp, the acknowledgement that I understand that you're in pain. And it is so, Shlomo HaMelech says, a problem shared is a problem have. Just the ability for someone to talk in a space that allows for them to feel heard and to be connected is so very therapeutic. And from a physiological and psychological and spiritual standpoint, by the way, is that, first of all, when it comes to physical pain, research shows that simply just touching somebody can decrease the feeling of subjective physical pain by 25%. Just that connection. We have an obligation, we have a mitzvah to alleviate someone's burden. And the reason why it's so effective, this empathy and validation, is because you're building an emotional bridge. You're allowing for a connection. Right? This person, whatever pain was exacerbated from that feeling of isolation, from being alone with their pain, is alleviated because of this connection. You understand when you talk to somebody about something that is on your mind and you really get that they understand, they get you, you know that you feel so much better. You've got somebody who you connect with. Now flip it around. Could you imagine when you come to someone in pain and rather than empathy and connection, they do something that perhaps we sometimes do, and that's they minimize it? You're making a big deal out of nothing. They justify it. If you only would have listened to me in the first place, they blame you. What are you doing? When you hear just the insanity of it, people come, they are craving, they want, they need, they desperately want that connection. And here's the thing. It doesn't even matter if you agree with them. And now let's say, again, we started by saying that the tzedakah may be directed at you or in general. Now, if it's directed at you, you empathize, you validate. End of the day is you're either going to agree or disagree and go along with whatever it is that they want. And here's the beauty of this. Let me share something with you. I gave a talk pre-COVID to an organization, an amazing organization, and it was from people who were divorced, 300-400 people. And I asked them the following question. I said, if your spouse would have done this one thing, just this one thing, I'm going to tell you what that one thing is, just this one thing, how many of you would still be married today? And again, he was still crazy, she was still this. You all had the same problems, except your spouse just did this one thing. How many of you would still be married today? I want to tell you about 75% of the hands shot up. What was this one thing? When you came to your spouse about something that was important to you, and rather than dismiss it, minimize it, get into an argument, get defensive, they were able to empathize. You generally felt that they connected and saw your pain. They validated, they understood where you were coming from. They didn't say you were crazy. They didn't say that you were ungrateful. They didn't say anything other than, I can see why you're in pain. And you were able to emote and talk as much as you want about it, and you felt that they genuinely, honestly heard you. And ready for this? And they still didn't do what you wanted. See, We think that we argue over things, where people sit at the Shabbos table, whether to rent or to lease, what color to paint that, where this goes. We argue over our right to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be respected, to be significant. We argue over our right for someone to validate who we are, where we are, how we are. Don't take that away from anyone. There was a study done, 2,500 convicted felons. And they asked them, these are indigent people who need a public defender to go ahead and to defend them in court. They asked these 2,500 people convicted of a felony whose sentences ranged from probation to 20 years to life, how fair do you think the legal system is? And do you know their answer did not depend on the sentence that they received. They could have gotten a slap on the wrist, 6 months home confinement, or 20 years to life. Their answer of how fair they felt the legal system is hinged only on how much time their public defender spent with them. If they felt heard, if they felt validated, if they felt significant, they thought it was fair. Everyone just wants to feel like they matter. During these times when we're living under just compressed conditions, and everyone's on top of each other, it's easy for us to become more sensitive, to become more raw when it comes to people directing their criticism to us and when we're directing it to others. And sometimes we can show more akaras hatov, more appreciation, more acknowledgement to the toll booth collector than we do to our own spouse, to our own children. Which brings us to the last and final point. The concept of akaras hatov, of gratitude, of showing appreciation is wired in who we are. We are Yehudim. We are defined by our ability to say thank you. And we cannot walk out of the restroom, take a bite of an apple, hear the clap of thunder, see an old friend without making a bracha, without connecting it to something larger, without showing our appreciation for it. If there's one way to kill a relationship, it's from not showing our appreciation. Focus on the good, and you'll see the good. And ultimately, some of you may know, I've written a number of books. One of them is a book called Never Get Angry Again. How'd that slip out? Never Get Angry Again is one of the reasons why it was successful, and it's published through a non-Jewish publisher, mainstream publisher, even though it's obviously steeped in Torah. But when I originally sold the book, is that they said, you know what, you're talking about God too much in this. And I said, but here's the thing. If a person becomes angry, it's because they're taking God out of the equation. So my editor said, well, we'll give God his own chapter. Very nice. So after we did the deal, we sort of expanded God throughout the book. Everyone in our lives is tailor-made, custom-made for our good and for our growth. We open this conversation, we open this session by reminding ourselves that this is Hashem's world. He runs the show. If you pull back the lens and look at the larger picture and recognize that everyone in our life is for our good and for our growth, we begin to need to ask ourselves the right question. Rather than bemoan our fate and blame these people who suck our time, money, energy, and heartache, and we think we'd be so much more successful, so much better off if we were just able to not have them in our lives. What we forget is that they are not the obstacle to a successful life. They are the reason we are in it. And make no mistake, whoever is in your life that's difficult, don't just accept them. Don't just embrace them. Celebrate them. Because we all have a tikkun, a spiritual fixing that needs to be done. And our character is often a reflection of that. And whatever deficiency or inefficiency or whatever challenge you're having with this person, it is perfectly, again, tailor-made for them and for you. Which is why we should focus on the good, embrace the good, love the good. End of the day, the quality of our lives comes down to the quality of our relationships. If we make a proactive decision to reframe the entirety of relationships, to look for the good, to recognize when somebody comes to you and they have a complaint, listen, empathize, and validate. And when you have to speak to somebody else, don't put them on the defensive. Magnify, optimize the positive and the good, and give them those very high expectations to live up to. With that, I thank you for listening and wish you positive, healthy relationships.
Thank you, Dr. Lieberman, for those incredible, inspiring words and insights. You talk about transforming relationships. I think you've transformed lives, including my own, in the insights that you've given us. We thank everybody for participating, and much hatzlacha in the relationships that you will have in the future.
I lift my bow to play, but the melody just fades away. A tune can't come together on its own. Joined by flute so sweet, the horns give strength, drums that beat. Music isn't meant to stand alone. Challenge comes my way, but the resolution's far away. I can't solve this problem on my own. Now a movement stands alongside me to hold my hand, accomplishing what I can't do alone. We all band in unity, all our voices blend exquisitely, moving the world with harmony. Stand as one community, common goals bring opportunity to change the world for you and me. We're a movement in time, and the time has come to join as one. Our movement moves mountains once too high. We're a movement in time, and the time has come for everyone to join us in our movement in time. We're a movement in time, and the time has come to join as one. Our movement moves mountains once too high. We're a movement in time, and the time has come for everyone to join us in our movement in time.
Agudas Yisrael was formed by the Gedolei Yisrael to deal with the challenges of that time, but also to deal with the challenges of this time and the next time, because the challenges always change. But what remains constant is that in order effectively to deal with them, we need a guf tziburi, a koach harabim, headed by the Gedolei Yisrael. It makes it important and imperative for each and every one of us to be part of that guf tziburi, to be part of that koach harabim, thereby effectuate the vision of the Gedolei Yisrael, who established this as a movement in time.
So lift your bows and play, let the music carry us away, raising us to heights we've never known. Stand up on your feet, scale each mountain to the beat. Klal Yisrael must not act alone. When challenge comes our way, together we won't be afraid. Agud Achas, never on our own. Now a movement stands, strength in numbers, time we spend, accomplishing what one can't do alone. We all band in unity, all our voices blend exquisitely, moving the world with harmony. Stand as one community, common goals bring opportunity to change the world and keep us free. to join as one. Our movement moves mountains once too high. We're a movement in time, and the time has come for everyone to join us in our movement in time. Come join us in our good days. Movement in time.
Okay, Michael, I know you're not Jewish, but just do the best you can with the pronunciation and read off the teleprompter the way it's written. Okay, now remember, you got to fit all the vital programs and initiatives of Agudas Yisrael, including all the important facts and figures.
Yep,
And
got
it's
it.
gotta fit into less than 3 minutes.
What?
Yeah, 3 minutes.
It's impossible.
Okay, here, we're on the clock here, people. Let's go. Sound speed.
Speed.
All right, Slate. Okay,
That's-
and
No, that's impossible. You can't fit.
action!
Agudas Yisrael of America. Since 1922, the Aguda has stayed true to its key goals, including strengthening Jewish communities, religious education, Torah learning, government and legal advocacy, comprehensive community-based social services, and inspiring Jewish youth. The Torah Project Commission and Daf Yomi program ensures the Torah foundation of our nation stays strong by increasing the level of Torah study by all segments of the adult population. Examples include Daf Yomi, the largest Torah learning program in the world, now the flagship learning system that inspired over 92,000 participants at the most recent Siyum Hashas at MetLife Stadium. 1,400 women participate in the Aguda Summer of Torah, and lots of other things. On to youth services. So much to say and so little time. The Aguda sponsors its highly successful Pirkei and Benos youth movements and numerous summer camps which impact tens of thousands of Jewish boys and girls with spiritually enriching programming throughout the year. Over 20,000 members in the youth groups and over 7,000 campers in the summer enjoy these flourishing programs. Additionally, Benos One-on-One offers personalized mentorship in 11 communities with over 800 pairs of matched big and little sisters.
Next topic.
Let's talk about leadership, quickly. So, leadership comes in many forms. There's the Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah. Our revered rabbinic leaders provide our guidance, preserve Masorah. The Aguda's Conference of Synagogue Rabbanim ensures that community leaders, the Rabbanim, the backbone of every Jewish community, have an organized mechanism for adracha and for unity.
Advocacy.
Let's turn our focus to government advocacy, a key hallmark of the vital work of Agudas Yisrael. They work and lobby for our needs on levels regional, state, and federal. Aguda's National Office of Government Affairs works tirelessly to be sure the world cares. They protect religious rights and civil liberties, standing by religious schools and their parent bodies, commenting on contemporary social, moral, and family issues needing much discretion, and international assistance for Jews in Israel or lands of oppression. Thanks to the Office of State Relations, major accomplishments alleviate potential huge frustrations. Take a quick example from each office specifically to get a feel for what is done so swiftly and terrifically. Illinois, over 1,700 meals served each day. Mid-Atlantic region, 700 day school scholarships in play. Ohio, 5 million in scholarships thanks to the vouchers been discussing. New Jersey, now 10,000 private school kids have busing. In California, religious freedom's got a lot of attention. Florida, a school choice rally to promote its expansion. Washington, D.C., here they protect Israel's security, ensure our rights and freedoms are upheld with unadulterated purity. Constituent services of Agudas Yisrael means they work for Klal Yisrael and for Reb Yisrael. Individuals' needs are always high on the list, religious, medical, or legal. What else here have I missed? Government assistance, educational referrals, keeping Shabbos in the workplace in our ever-pressured worlds. Senior citizens programs create centers with a mission, structured social time, hot lunches always packed with nutrition. Jewish seniors by the hundreds have convened and congregated, feel fulfilled and socialized so they're never isolated. When a loved one reaches end-of-life decisions needed, means there's no passivity, Chaim Aruchim gives the halachic guidance needed with true sensitivity. Treatments that may have been delayed or just denied can be granted with the funding and advocacy that's supplied.
It's fine, just keep going.
14,000 students thrive in Project Learn. They get special education tailor-made for what they yearn. Yeshiva services means Aguda helps so many schools navigate the ever-changing government regulations and rules. So much red tape and detail work, all part of their bureaucracy. Baruch Hashem, Aguda knows just how to work in our democracy. At Pesach time, there are Jews overseas who don't have any matzah, wine, or other basic Seder needs. If you need to find a job but don't have great qualifications, PCS and COPE can train and place you now in corporations. Isn't it incredible how much Aguda does for every Jew? You never knew how vital every single program was for you. So join with the Aguda, become a member, do it fast. You'll be the voice of our tomorrow as your link to our great past. Whew.
Okay, cut. All right, wasn't bad. Let's just take it again from the top, and this time a little faster, please.
What?